Welcome to Mysterium, where we taste the wonder and mystery of all of this. What is this? Let us not seek for a theory behind the phenomena. The phenomena themselves are the theory. Goethe. In this video, we'll explore how we're embedded within a greater whole, the distinct modes of being of our left and right brain hemispheres, and a return towards wholeness. I'll be referring to ideas that have been covered in my previous video, so I'd recommend watching it if you haven't yet. Keep in mind the process of complexification, the process of increasing simultaneous differentiation and integration of parts as greater functional wholes. I find it interesting that I seem to be separate and distinct, but yet, when I examine my existence, what I'm made of and its successive constituents, who am I and all that I depend upon, I find out that I'm interconnected to the unfolding of reality. Our existence is possible because of interconnectedness. You, as an individual, emerged from the entire history of the universe up until this point. The unfolding of our universe includes our solar system, Earth's biosphere, our civilization, the meeting of complementary opposites, and your personal life history. You are made of different organ systems, which are made of various kinds of organs and tissues, and these involve about 60 trillion cells. Cells are made of molecules, which are made of atoms. Looking further, atoms, which you may have heard of as being composed of 99% empty space, are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. These protons and neutrons are made of quarks, and quarks and electrons are the excitations of the quantum fields. What does excitations of the quantum fields mean? Imagine the dynamic unfolding of different kinds of interactions that creates a seemingly separate and distinct phenomenon, like the interactions and conditions from which a tornado emerges from air, a whirlpool from water, or a murmuration from individual starlings. It's activity and interconnectedness all the way down. In our relentless search to find the fundamental building blocks of reality, we have analyzed and so divided reality into increasingly smaller constituents, and have arrived at the quantum fields that point to a fundamental unity. We've experimentally confirmed quantum effects like entanglement at the smallest scale, in which the state of one particle instantaneously correlates with the state of another regardless of distance. This points to a reality that's field-based, and we're finding evidence at the biological scale, such as in photosynthesis, the migration of birds, and the brain. Our will does not control the fundamental forces, the sun, the air that we breathe, most of the breathing that we do, the beating of our hearts, and certainly not the activity of 60 trillion cells, which is approximately 8,000 times greater than the population of Earth. Yet, we can each feel that and say, I am. Each of us exists primarily because we are embedded within a myriad of relations and their activities, many of which we are absolutely unaware of, not solely because of our will. 3 billion heartbeats occur in the course of the average human life. Have you directly willed any of them? You are a nexus of continuously unfolding interrelations, or as beautifully expressed by Carl Sagan, the cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Nearly everything that allows us to exist is out of the control of our will, as are much of the influences that have shaped our personalities and behaviors. The manifold causes of the past and the weight that it carries determines and conditions us. Yet, from this emerge a sense of will that feels free. Aligned with the process of complexification, this potent free will, and of course, along with the help of all that we are part of, may be sufficient to integrate the weight of the past and simultaneously differentiate by cultivating the will and embodying the call of the individuated self, and thus becoming a greater functional self that can contribute to the whole that we are all embedded within. We are each both a self and embedded, both distinct and interconnected. In my previous video, I suggested how we are the reflection and manifestation of the process of complexification, and that our brain hemispheres reflect just that. The left hemisphere is the incarnation of differentiation, and the right hemisphere is the incarnation of integration. Ian McGilchrist and his works on the brain hemispheres provides insight into the nature of human cognition, how we come to know and understand the world and ourselves, and of reality. Ever since I've come across his works, I've been wondering, what could a mode of being at the edge of criticality between the left and right hemispheres look like? Let's explore his works for hints. This is my understanding of each hemisphere's mode of being, how it perceives, experiences, interacts, and relates to reality. To start, both of the differentiated hemispheres are dynamically involved in most of our everyday experience and function. However, one hemisphere can have more influence than the other. The corpus callosum, a band of neurotissue, joins both hemispheres and is responsible for the transfer of information, which allows for one hemisphere to excite or inhibit the other, integrating and differentiating the two. This connection both divides and unites the left and the right hemispheres. Both hemispheres cannot be active at the exact same time. You cannot effectively have both focused attention and broad attention. It seems that the functional differences between the hemispheres are fundamentally in how attention is paid. How you pay attention to the world affects what you perceive, and through interacting with your perception of the world, you change the world and yourself in that way. If I see the world as lifeless, I become lifeless. If I see the world as alive, I become alive. The right hemisphere helps us understand the world and be grounded in it. Its mode of attention is global and flexible. Its view is inclusive as both and it attends to wholes and the present. Its mode of thinking is nonlinear, implicit, and holistic. It's attuned to the present moment and exploration, reflecting its propensity for newness and intuition. This hemisphere grounds experience and contextualizes, and is interested in relations, feeling, and emotions. By feeling, I mean interoception, sensing the internal sensations in your body. It pays more attention to the terrain rather than the map. It has a primary role in the holistic embodied experience of the world. It sees the self as experiential, existing, and relational. In contrast, the left hemisphere helps us manipulate the world and carry out our will. Its mode of attention is local and focused. Its view is exclusive as either or, and it attends to parts and conceptualizations. Its mode of thinking is sequential, explicit, and analytical. It's attuned to familiarity and exploitation, reflecting its propensity for the known and certainty. This hemisphere abstracts and decontextualizes, giving us copies of the world that exist as concepts only in our minds, representations of the world. it pays more attention to the map rather than the terrain. It's primarily responsible for language and is interested in utility and what is man-made. It sees the self as an expression of the will, of I am, grasping and utilizing. Can you see how the left hemisphere's exclusive perspective of either or, paying attention to boundaries and separation, is necessary for perceiving parts? And how the right hemisphere's inclusive perspective of both and, paying attention to relations, is necessary for perceiving wholes? We can learn about the role of each hemisphere through a non-invasive treatment called TMS that uses magnetic fields to temporarily inhibit brain activity, and from the case studies of brain injuries. Starting with TMS, McGilchrist has mentioned accounts of how people who've had their right hemisphere inhibited describe things they would normally describe as animate as lifeless, like machines. And for people who've had their left hemisphere inhibited, things that they would think of as inanimate as alive, like the sun. One as something you're able to manipulate, and the other as something you're able to relate to. Fascinatingly, there are studies of TMS inhibiting regions of the left hemisphere that have found an increase in creative abilities, such as insight problem solving, aha moment, drawing, and accurate quantity estimation. This is the hemisphere that overlays reality with concepts, representations of what we believe to be reality that constrains and influences how we experience reality. These findings are unique to inhibitory TMS of the left hemisphere and have not been reported for the right hemisphere. This coincides with the hypothesis that savant syndrome may arise from dysfunction or damage in the left hemisphere and the subsequent compensation by the right hemisphere. Savant syndrome is a rare condition in which a person with various developmental disorders or a brain injury displays extraordinary abilities in a specific area, such as music, art, mathematics, or memory. For example, Kim Peek could read 2 pages of a book at once in 8 seconds, memorized nearly everything in all of the 10,000 books he read, and had nearly instantaneous recall. Orlando Sorrell, after being hit by a baseball on the left side of his head, can provide the day for any given date without any explicit mental calculation, which looks like intuition. And Derek Amato, who also suffered from a left hemisphere injury, suddenly knew how to play beautiful and elegant piano melodies by following the black and white squares that appeared in his mind. Morris Freedman, a neurology professor who is the head of the neurology division, a scientist, and a medical director of cognition and behavior at Baycrest Hospital and Health Sciences Research Center, seems to be building upon similar insights from his own findings. In 2003, he conducted a study and, quote, found a significant effect on intentionality on random physical phenomena in a patient with left frontal damage, end quote. Patients in the study were tasked with moving an arrow in the center of a computer screen, either left or right, using only their intention. The arrow was controlled by a random event generator of zeros and ones, and so should stay in the center if the expected outcome of 50% chance occurs. These effects are typically small. Say it deviates to 50.055% instead of remaining at 50%, but they're statistically significant, as in the outcomes can be tilted to favor lesser or greater than chance, and that ultimately intention does appear to have an effect on matter. And also, What if these abilities can be cultivated to become more potent? His study in 2018 used the same experimental task as his prior study and found significant effects for 2 patients with left hemisphere damage compared to normal participants. Recently, in 2023, Freedman found a significant effect in TMS inhibition of left hemisphere regions, enhancing participants' abilities for mind-matter interactions. Inhibitory TMS can be described as creating temporary virtual brain lesions. So Freedman, moving on from patients with actual left hemisphere lesions, went to produce temporary virtual brain lesions on regions of the left hemisphere and found that this increased participants' abilities to skew the outcome of a random event generator. In the same study, inhibiting the right hemisphere showed no meaningful side effect. Could it be that when our conceptual overlays on reality and ourselves are not as dominant, our right hemisphere is free to interface with the underlying wholeness more deeply, allowing access to information we typically cannot access within ourselves or potentially beyond ourselves, and enhancing our ability to use intention to influence what is seemingly separate? And that this interfacing with the whole can manifest as extraordinary creative abilities and memory and mind-matter interactions? Are we limiting ourselves with self-imposed thoughts that attempt to place boundaries on what is fundamentally interconnected? I would not be surprised if this is the case, but I will expand on this later. I do want to say I find it intriguing that in deeper states of meditation, what I'd call pure embodiment in stillness that is minimally or not conceptual, a predominantly right hemisphere state, practitioners and traditions describe a progression from states of stillness to bliss, and of increasing dissolution of boundaries in space, consciousness, and self. I've personally experienced states of bliss and some dissolution of boundaries during meditation. This stuff seems to be real. For now, the takeaway is that the right hemisphere, that part of us that feels the whispers of intuition, may be something like an umbilical cord to the whole. Before turning to brain injuries, we'll need to understand a bit about how the brain functions. Each hemisphere is responsible for the opposite side of the body. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and pays attention to the right visual field, whereas the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body and pays attention to the left visual field. And if needed, it can attend to the right side. In split brain patients, those who've had their corpus callosum severed, this organization of the brain becomes very apparent. For example, an image displayed only to the left visual field of a patient, of which the right hemisphere sees, is not seen by the left hemisphere. And so, when asked about what they saw, they'd say nothing was seen, since language is mediated by the left hemisphere. However, when asked to draw what they saw with their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, they are able to draw the image. With that out of the way, let's begin. Damage to the left hemisphere's narrow and focused attention includes symptoms such as impaired tool use, goal-directed purposive movement, speech production, abstract thinking, and language skills. Damage to the right hemisphere's broad and vigilant attention includes symptoms such as denial of stroke-related injury, neglect of one side of one's body, both visual and physical, loss of recognition of one's own body parts, impaired spatial awareness and orientation, impaired recognition of faces, and impaired recognition of facial and bodily expression of emotions. Actually, denial of stroke-related injury and neglect of one side of one's body can occur after damage in either hemisphere. However, they are approximately twice as likely and more severe after damage in the right hemisphere because of this hemisphere's holistic and broad role in our functioning. Fascinatingly, not recognizing one's own body part predominantly occurs after damage to the right hemisphere. In his book, McGilchrist mentions a case where a patient believed that her left arm was her mother's, but immediately after the inhibition of her left hemisphere, when asked to show her left arm, she recognized it as her own. However, after the effects of the inhibition wore off, she returned to believing that her left arm was her mother's. Under the effects of the inhibition, when asked where her mother's arm was, she looked under the bedclothes, eventually stating that, quote, "It must be here, in the corner. It's pretty warm. It is a strong arm. My mother was a laundress," end quote. The right hemisphere, which attends to holes, is able to compensate for damage in the left hemisphere, whereas the left hemisphere, which attends to parts, is less able to do so. Contrasting the two hemispheres, this suggests that the left hemisphere is inherently partial and the right hemisphere is inherently holistic. In short, damage to the left hemisphere impairs conceptualization, sequential motor movements like using tools or getting dressed, and expressions of the ego, while damage to the right hemisphere impairs embodiment as a whole, perception of wholes, which includes self, and relational abilities. The left hemisphere provides the agency and the right hemisphere provides the context that grounds the agency. I find this to be the greatest hint for the proper relations between the left and right hemispheres to function as a greater whole. Let's now look at images that tells us about the perception of each hemisphere. The two sets of images were drawn by a patient who had a hemisphere inhibited by TMS one at a time. In the center, an image was drawn when both hemispheres were active. On the left side, only the right hemisphere was active, and on the right side, only the left hemisphere was active. The left hemisphere paid attention to parts, whereas the right hemisphere paid attention to wholes. In this image, we're looking at drawings of a cube by either hemisphere before and after the corpus callosum was severed. The drawings on the left side were drawn by the left hand, which corresponds to the right hemisphere, and the drawings on the right side were drawn by the right hand, which corresponds to the left hemisphere. Notice how after the operation, the right hemisphere was still able to draw a 3D cube, but the left hemisphere could not. Now, let's look at videos.
Unlike Graham, Peggy Palmer has normal vision.
No, she's not bad.
She should be able to copy this star easily.
I'll never get this star, I'm hopeless at this.
But something odd is happening. One whole side of the star is missing. Peggy has a condition called visual neglect. Although her eyesight is fine, half of her visual world no longer seems to matter. 10 years ago, Peggy suffered a stroke in the parietal lobes of her brain.
The parietal lobes are concerned mainly with creating a three-dimensional representation of the spatial layout of the world, allowing a person to walk around, to navigate, to avoid bumping into things. When the right parietal is damaged, the patient is unable to deal with the left side of the world.
This condition has fascinated neurologists for more than a century because it reveals not only how the brain shapes the way we perceive space in the present, it even determines the spatial look of our memories. This became apparent when Peggy was asked to draw a daisy from memory.
Right. A daisy it shall be.
For neuropsychologist Peter Halligan, Peggy's drawings reveal exactly what's gone wrong.
Is like a radar system, whereby the actual radar system on the left-hand side is no longer working well. If someone comes in on my left-hand side now, or I hear a sound, my eyes will immediately move to the left-hand side. That makes me, for evolutionary purposes, very aware of my environment. Because if I wasn't aware of those things, I'd have accidents. I'd get hurt, or I might get eaten by wild animals and whatever. Now, in Peggy's case, she will not attend to those things that we would normally be aware of.
Peggy thinks she's drawn her daisies right, until it's pointed out to her.
You've noticed that, have you?
Oh, dear.
So what Peggy's drawn for us is several nice daisies with the left side missing. Same with this one, and this one. And look at this one, this is a very good example.
I've done it on all of them.
Which means that she's not only neglecting events in the world, but when she conjures up a mental image, she's ignoring the left side of that mental image.
Well, I thought I was going all the way round, you see.
And this shows you that this is not simply a sensory problem, but a problem of consciousness.
I don't know. It's because I was so concentrating on that side. It takes everything away, you see. It's this attention, really. It's taken away. There must be two attentions somewhere in your body. That one side's taking the other one away. I can't make it out at all. Very odd.
A man with two brains.
You've been working a long time with Dr. Xenbase?
14 or 15 years.
Just it doesn't seem like that long, does it?
Well, when
The collaboration began when Joe had surgery.
And you had this procedure to correct an epileptic problem,
Yes.
is that right?
Trying to stop the seizures. I was having seizures like every day or so, or sometimes 2 or 3 a day.
To control Joe's epileptic seizures, a surgeon severed the connection between the two halves of his brain. Cutting the corpus callosum like this prevented the spread of the electric storms that caused his seizures. But it also prevented the left and right halves of his brain from communicating with each other.
keep your hands out in front
In
of
an
you.
experiment that's now a classic in brain research,
Hemisphere.
Mike Xenbase over 30 years ago used a similar setup to find out if the two halves of the brain are specialized to do different things.
Ship.
Joe is being flashed a word only to one half of his brain. Words flashed to the right
Storm.
are seen only by his left brain, and Joe can report seeing those words just fine.
Piano.
Good.
But when a word is flashed to his right brain,
Didn't see that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you
but now watch what happens.
to draw that with your left hand.
You get me lost.
Why don't you try drawing another picture of it over here if that'll help you.
Oh, phone.
What do you think will happen here?
So for you, we're doing a live experiment. Never done it before.
The experiment involves the 16th century Italian painter Arcimboldo, who made faces out of fruit, flowers, meat, even books. From other research, there's reason to believe that the ability to recognize faces is located exclusively in the right hemisphere. So Mike wondered if Arcimboldo's paintings would look different to each of Joe's two brains.
So will his left hemisphere say, I saw a potato, I didn't see a face? And will his right hemisphere say, I saw the face, and not comment on the fact it was made out of a potato?
You're going to see a figure followed by a choice of 2 words.
If this works, it'll be terrific, but we'll see. So here it is, live.
Okay?
The first painting goes to the right hemisphere. And Joe points to
Okay, point it
face.
down.
The next painting goes to his left brain. And this time he points to fruits. Mike seemed pleased.
Are you having a moment?
This is too good.
Again to the right brain, and Joe sees it as a face.
Point it down.
But to the left brain,
Face made out of books.
Point it up.
What are the books?
are you happy with what you're seeing?
It's unbelievable. He's doing it. You see that?
It's good. It's going so fast. It's shifting from left to right so fast. I can't keep up with you. You're used to looking at this.
When you show him a face in the right side, the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
he's focusing in on the elements that made up the face.
Yeah.
When you show him the exact same picture in the left field going to the right hemisphere, he's focusing on the face and not the elements.
And not the elements.
Is it becoming clearer how the left hemisphere is drawn to parts, while the right hemisphere is drawn to wholes? To get a sense of the phenomenological experience of what it's like when one hemisphere becomes impaired in its functioning, leading to the other becoming dominant, let's have a look at the accounts of two people who had suffered a brain injury. First, Jason Paget was mugged and sustained an overall brain injury, but in particular to his right hemisphere, allowing the hemisphere that pays attention to differentiation to become dominant. He describes his experience after his injury. Quote, "So, before my brain injury, when I saw something moved, it looked like it was moving smooth and was continuous. But after my brain injury, when something moved across my field of view, it looked choppy and discrete, like I was watching a video frame by individual frame, only in real time. That fluidity of motion was gone. When something moved, I was extremely aware of the picture frames. If something moved fast, the picture frames were further apart, and if something moved slower, the picture frames were closer together. Also gave everything a slightly pixelated quality. It's like everything that is moving is relative to a matrix or a grid structure, like pixels on a television screen." End quote. Paget's case highlights the right hemisphere's role in integration as his visual perception of motion became discontinuous and fragmented. Severe cases can lead to motion blindness. Second, Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuroscientist, suffered a hemorrhage in her left hemisphere, allowing the hemisphere that pays attention to integration to become dominant. Taylor describes her experience after her injury and her scientific understanding. Quote, "In the course of 4 hours, I watched my brain completely deteriorate in its ability to process all information. On the morning of the hemorrhage, I could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. I essentially became an infant in a woman's body." And our left hemisphere thinks in language. It's that ongoing brain chatter that connects me in my internal world to the external world. And as soon as my left hemisphere says to me, "I am," I become separate. I become a single solid individual, separate from the energy flow around me and separate from you. And this is the portion of my brain I lost in the morning of my stroke. And I look down at my arm and I realize that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall. And all I could detect was this energy. And I'm asking myself, what is wrong with me? What is going on? And in that moment, my left hemisphere brain chatter went totally silent. And at first, I was shocked to find myself inside of a silent mind. But then I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me. And because I could no longer identify the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all the energy that was, and it was beautiful there. Then all of a sudden, my left hemisphere comes back online and says to me, "Hey, we've got a problem. We've got to get some help." But then I immediately drifted right back out into the consciousness. And I affectionately refer to this space as La La Land. But it was beautiful there. Imagine what it would be like to be totally disconnected from your brain chatter that connects you to the external world. So here I am in this space, and my job and any stress related to my job, it was gone. And I felt lighter in my body. And imagine all of the relationships in the external world and any stressors related to any of those. They were gone. And I felt this sense of peacefulness. And imagine what it would feel like to lose 37 years of emotional baggage, feeling euphoria. Oh, I felt euphoria. Euphoria. It was beautiful. And again, my left hemisphere comes online and says, hey, you've got to pay attention, end quote. I don't know about you, but to me, the left hemisphere screams parts and differentiation, while the right hemisphere screams wholes and integration, the complementary opposites in the process of complexification. Not only that, a paper by McGilchrist points to how the structure of each hemisphere reflects their function. The left hemisphere is more differentiated by being, quote, more closely interconnected within itself and within regions of itself, end quote, as it has more gray matter for processing of information. In contrast, the right hemisphere is more integrated by being broadly connected between regions, as it has more white matter, quote, facilitating swift transfer of information between the cortex and centers below the cortex, end quote. As above, so below. As within, so without. There's a deep coherence to whatever this is that we are participating in. Let's gather all that we've covered and start wrapping up this section. I'll begin with describing each of the hemisphere as an archetype. The left hemisphere, with its narrow and focused attention and its either-or perspective, is fitted for grasping and manipulating the world for utility through the conceptual carving up of the world, what is fundamentally interconnected and flowing into distinct parts by creating and applying boundaries on self and non-self, this and that. In the creation of conceptual boundaries or representations, the left hemisphere commits to a degree of certainty about the world and pays attention to what's familiar. This propensity for familiarity and certainty is what makes concepts sticky to the mind, especially if certainty is treated as true or false rather than as degrees. Its thinking is explicit, linear, and literal in order to create and apply its either-or boundaries onto the world. Ideally, these boundaries are held together by a certainty which is grounded in experience. Ultimately, the left hemisphere interacts with the world through representations of reality, static structures of the mind that are detached from the embodied present moment that is continuously flowing. It puts what it encounters into abstract and familiar categories. In its conceptualizing, it has to step outside of the present moment, and thus, it doesn't experience the fullness and depths of the phenomenal world. The nature of this hemisphere is inherently partial, and so it can enclose itself within and become trapped in its partial and disembodied perspective. The left hemisphere is the seat of the ego and will, which allows for the expression of I am, differentiating self and other. The right hemisphere, with its broad and holistic attention and both-and perspective, is fitted for understanding the world through the embodied relating to the world as a whole by being grounded in experience, feeling what it relates to, attending to context, and receiving intuitive impressions that gesture towards a greater whole. As embodiment unfolds in the ever-changing present moment, the right hemisphere is open to the unknown and pays attention to what's new. This propensity for the unknown and newness gives it the flexibility to flow with the unfolding of the evolving world. Its thinking is implicit integrative, and metaphorical to perceive the whole of an interconnected reality that cannot be fully explicated. Ideally, this hemisphere's embodied understanding of the world is complemented by a conceptual understanding that points it to new possibilities. Ultimately, the right hemisphere interacts with the world through its embodied experience in the present moment and is thus rooted in the here and now. Its presencing, sensing of the present, is what enables it to appreciate the uniqueness of what it encounters. The nature of this hemisphere is inherently holistic and embodied, and so in its relating to the whole, it feels the colors and the weight of the world. The right hemisphere is the seat of our direct felt experience of and depth of connection to the phenomenal world and all that exists, which allows for the embodied, silent, and relational expressions of existence, integrating our embeddedness. Creation occurs at the edge of both hemispheres, with a slight asymmetry to the right hemisphere, in the unique integration of differentiated parts as a greater whole. I'll be drawing connections between fundamental physics and the hemispheres. If you're not familiar with wave-particle duality, I highly recommend at least watching these two videos, and if they pique your curiosity, to dig further into this intriguing phenomenon of our reality. In essence, wave-particle duality tells us that, depending on context, a particle, like an electron, can exhibit wave-like behaviors, and a wave, like light, can exhibit particle-like behaviors. This all takes place in a reality that is fundamentally composed of fields. To me, there seems to be similarities between wave-particle duality, the strong force, and gravity, and the hemispheres. Similar to how particles are fundamentally grounded in the quantum fields, the left hemisphere is fundamentally grounded in the interconnected and embodied nature of the right hemisphere. Remember how Jill Bolte Taylor, after a stroke in her right hemisphere, lost her ego, her particularity, and was unable to differentiate between herself and the environment she was in? Taylor recounted, quote, "I looked down at my arm and I realized that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall, and all I could detect was this energy." End quote. The left hemisphere creates the particularization of a seemingly separate and distinct entity, the ego, which emerges from the right hemisphere's embodied relational field that is entangled with the phenomenal world. The strong force, one of the four fundamental forces of nature, reminds me of the left hemisphere's ability to differentiate parts and grasp them, and its tight grip on concepts. The strong force has the shortest range out of all the forces and deals with the formation of protons and neutrons, forming, via confinement, the earliest distinctions of visible matter from the undifferentiated primordial soup of the embryonic universe. Similar to the stickiness of concepts, how a person holds on tighter to their beliefs that are challenged, the strong force has this particular behavior, unlike any other force, in which as the parts of, let's say, a proton begin to separate, the force increases with distance of separation up to a point, like a hand tightening to prevent something from escaping its grasp. The shortest range force grasps unbound energy and confines it into differentiated protons and neutrons, and will tighten its grip if you attempt to break the confinement. Gravity, another fundamental force of nature, reminds me of the right hemisphere's ability to integrate parts into greater wholes and its relational and diffuse attention. Gravity has infinite range and it's the weakest force, yet it has the greatest effect on massive wholes like celestial objects. It is the only force that is solely attractive. The longest range attractive force integrates greater wholes at the largest scale, significantly contributing to the formation of stars, planets, solar systems, galaxies, and superclusters. This gives form to the cosmic web, which happens to look like the neuronal networks of a brain. Am I cherry-picking? Or are these riddles? Or both? We've arrived at the final section. I can't say I know much, but from my perspective, it appears that many of humanity's tragedies are self-inflicted by an ego that considers itself entirely separate from all that it has relations to and is embedded within, such as fellow humans, other animals, plants, fungi, water, air, and planet Earth. Like a cancer cell in the body that achieves its objective at the expense of the greater whole in which it's embedded within, one nation and eventually one person, as the destructive capabilities of our technology increases, can destroy humanity as we know it and/or devastate life on Earth because of the illusion of separation. Fragmented thinking and power are the perfect recipe for the disintegration of the greater wholes. Michael Levin's research shows that cancer cells have something like a contracted sense of self after being disconnected from the cellular communication network. By restoring the cancer cell to the larger network, the cells return to their normal behavior. This suggests perhaps by somehow restoring the ego to the greater whole in which it's embedded within, we could return the ego to its normal behavior, whatever that may be. I imagine that, at the least, the ego won't achieve its objectives at the expense of the greater whole, which seems like the primary obstacle to the continuation of humanity's complexification. What could a return towards wholeness look like? I think and feel that it's a mode of being that dynamically integrates the left and right hemispheres, with an asymmetry towards the right hemisphere. Fundamentally, we have an agency that needs to be grounded in the interconnectedness from which it emerged. Let's turn to a cyclical process that McGilchrist has identified for insight. Quote, "What begins in the right hemisphere's world is sent to the left hemisphere world for processing, but must be returned to the world of the right hemisphere where a new synthesis can be made." End quote. In essence, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, or integrated whole, differentiation of parts, reintegration of parts as a greater whole. He seems to be describing the process of complexification. The process begins with a whole, parts are differentiated, and then parts are reintegrated to form a greater whole. A side note, it appears that a whole precedes the differentiation into parts, and newly formed wholes seems to begin as mostly undifferentiated. Parts of a whole don't necessarily have to begin as physically conjoined. They can be physically separated but linked through interactions or relationships that can later become more differentiated and integrated. Here are a few examples. The early universe and its undifferentiated energy undergoing the process and becoming all the differentiated and integrated matter. Massive undifferentiated clouds of gas and dust becoming a solar system. animals within an environment with undifferentiated interrelations that can later become differentiated and form an ecosystem, a vague idea becoming a distinct concept or manifested as a physical object, an embryo as a blob becoming a distinct organism, a child becoming an independent and integrated family member, and an undifferentiated psyche differentiating into various and distinct psychological parts, and the integration of all parts becoming the individuated self. Coming back, McGilchrist's process seems to fit the general process of learning, which reflects the process of complexification. Let's apply it to learning from experiences in general. We begin with an experience as a whole, which upon self-reflection we can differentiate it into the different events that occurred within the experience. Reflecting upon these events, we can see which mattered more or less to the experience as a whole, and then narrow down the most significant events. From here, we can identify lessons, where and how we went wrong, and how we could respond better. Finally, we'd reintegrate our lessons with the experience and reflect upon our understanding about the experience and ourselves as a whole. Now, let's apply it to learning concepts in general. We take a concept, which typically begins as a vague idea, differentiate it into sub-concepts and relate each to the larger concept and vice versa, and reintegrate the sub-concepts to form a greater understanding of the larger concept. What I want to emphasize here is the pattern of how a whole is differentiated into its parts. The relations between parts and whole are identified, and then the parts are reintegrated to form a greater whole. This process points to an asymmetry towards wholeness and unification, or the right hemisphere, which leads to complexification since differentiated parts are synthesized into a greater whole. Interestingly, our universe is fundamentally asymmetrical. Our best theory for particle physics predicts an equal number of matter and antimatter particles during the Big Bang, which upon contact with each other are annihilated into light, leaving behind no matter for the formation of anything. Fortunately, that was not the case, as there was approximately one extra matter particle for every billion matter-antimatter pairs. The existence of matter and complexity that we can observe in the universe originated from a fundamental asymmetry. I wonder if the asymmetry in the process of complexification as an organizing principle could be related. Could one be an asymmetry towards matter and thus existence, and the other towards a unification of differentiated matter and existence? Now that we've laid some groundwork, let's begin exploring what a return towards wholeness could look like. We will frame the remainder of this video with a quote by neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor. Quote, "Most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we are actually feeling creatures that think." End quote. In applying the process of right, left, right, we begin with realizing the whole that we are a part of. Let's revisit what I said earlier in this video. You and everything else are nexuses of continuously unfolding interrelations. Across all scales of reality, there are vertical dependencies and horizontal interdependencies. Every contraction and expansion of your heart and lungs can materially and energetically be traced back to the birth and death of stars, and their own internal contraction by gravity and expansion by nuclear fusion. Our sense of self, ego, and will, agency, emerge from interconnected activities. Our agency, our ability to make choices, direct our lives, and affect the world is grounded in an ocean of unfolding interrelated processes. We originated from pure relational activity. You exist not because of your will. Your will maintains your existence. However, the origin of everything that is prerequisite to your will and for you to enact your will upon are outside of your will. Everything exists because interrelations exist. This is not to say your will does not matter. Your will certainly matters and is integral to the integrity of yourself as a whole and the greater whole from which you emerge and are embedded within. Your choices shape your own unfolding and contribute to the unfolding of the whole. Reality is fundamentally interconnected, and that interconnectedness manifested our seemingly separate and distinct egos. The ego, incarnated by the left hemisphere, which is inherently partial, and reality, which is inherently interconnected, are essentially misaligned. Evidently, a partial view cannot fully enclose interconnectedness, the same way concepts cannot encase the whole of reality. A partial view within an interconnected whole is dysfunctional. Remember that when the left hemisphere is left to its own devices, after damage in the right hemisphere, it's likely to neglect the left side of the visual field and body, and even believe that its own left arm belongs to another person. Incompleteness is functionally innate to the left hemisphere. It believes in its illusion of separation when it's actually fundamentally interconnected. However, this limitation can be transcended by being in proper relation to the right hemisphere. The limitations of the right hemisphere are a complete dissolution into the flow of reality, a lack of boundaries, and a lack of differentiation of self. Both are necessary, form and formlessness, and the asymmetry leans towards the right hemisphere and its attunement to wholes, relations, the present, and the new, which is aligned with a reality in which forms are in flux, constantly changing. Is it then surprising that as humanity became increasingly conceptual, as attention migrated to our heads, we became increasingly separated from nature, the sacred, and ourselves as a whole, and that this may have led to internal and external conflicts driven by fragmentation and separation? And as we return our attention back to our bodies, embodiment, we may experience healing, and that the remedy to our existential risk, many of which are coordination problems, appears to be a way of living that's aligned with the interconnectedness of reality? We share planet Earth and the emotional energies that flow within humanity and across generations. An antidote for the misalignment between the inherent partiality of the left hemisphere and the inherent interconnectedness of the right hemisphere is to contextualize and embed the either-or duality within a non-duality that holds both either-or and both-and. Thank you, McGilchrist, dearly. It's the complexification of both hemispheres with an asymmetry towards the right hemisphere, a perspective that can perceive both the whole and the differentiated parts and wholes. We are each both a self and embedded, both distinct and interconnected. That seems to be the insight of yin and yang, which tells us that the duality of phenomena is complementary to a greater whole, and that all the magic or complexification is dynamically unfolding at the curved edge. Circles and curvature symbolize yin and the right hemisphere, the reintegration of parts as a greater whole. I will expand on yin-yang in another video, but I want to highlight that, like our human ancestors, I believe the symbol points to profound insights for our understanding of reality and to practically balance ourselves at the edge. A return to wholeness looks like the complexification of both left and right hemispheres. The either-or conceptualization and purposive agency, differentiating nature of the left hemisphere can be grounded in the both-and holistic perspective, relational field of feeling, and embodiment, integrating nature of the right hemisphere. In perceiving the interconnectedness of particulars, we may begin to see and feel the sacred. This may manifest as an embodied and purposive agency who's aligned with the interconnected whole, from which they emerged and are embedded within. Given the interconnected nature of our universe, this seems to be a natural position that one can realize by asking questions like, what am I? Who am I? And what is this? This reminds me of the ancient Greek proverb, know thyself. In committing to the pursuit of knowing oneself, one arrives at where they began, interconnectedness realizing interconnectedness. Full disclosure, I'm almost 3 years into spirituality and 1.5 years into a set of practices that I find effective for me. I define spirituality as a deeply felt sense of the interrelatedness of the whole, and an embeddedness, aligned agency, relation, and participation with the whole. Before spirituality, I had spent the 9 years prior enjoying actively being in my head. I loved always having something to chew on in my mind. I was slapping conceptual labels onto everything. In hindsight, though, I was disembodied in some way. I'd look at myself in the mirror and feel a sense of disconnect to my body. Now, I can feel both being in a body and being my body. And instead of slapping labels everywhere, I'm attending to the present and feeling the phenomenal world. The most significant change I've noticed after metabolizing some of my shadows is that my will feels freer than before. Or put differently, it seems like I'm less in my own way, and I'm able to feel more and take less time to realize when I'm not at my best. I'll be drawing from my experiences and the convergences I've noticed in what I've learned to speak to this return to wholeness. Ultimately, I'm just sharing something that has made me feel integrated, at home in the universe, and freer. And I understand that we all have our own paths. Overall, given that this is fairly recent, the long-term effectiveness of what I will outline remains to be embodied and proven. With that aside, it seems that our purposive agency can be grounded in a knowing of interconnectedness that is both conceptual and embodied. Conceptual and embodied interconnectedness can reciprocally inform and deepen each other's knowing of the phenomenon. An embodied knowing can be deepened by a conceptual knowing, and a conceptual knowing can be deepened by an embodied knowing. Let's see how this might work. I don't exactly know how the ancient spiritual traditions arrived at the realization of interconnectedness, but they seem to have more of an embodied approach through practices. Nowadays, if one wonders about their origins, they can access humanity's knowledge at their fingertips and conceptually realize the interconnectedness of all things. Or just watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos series. One's self will be traced through their family to the history and activities of humanity and planet Earth, alongside the evolution of life, the death and birth of stars, and to the origins of the universe. In other words, all the differentiated facts are out there pointing to the phenomenon, and one just has to reintegrate them. But remember, concepts and the nature of the left hemisphere are inherently partial. Conceptually understanding interconnectedness is easy. Embodying it is what's hard. Earlier, I mentioned that meditation can provide direct experience of a sense of boundary dissolution. It feels like this direct experience, along with other practices, can ground the conceptual understanding of interconnectedness. To be grounded in the wholeness of the right hemisphere, we must feel and be embodied. This is where I think and feel that spiritual practices like meditation and breathwork can help. Boiling it down, your body speaks to you, and for you to perceive its communication, you'll need to learn its silent language of felt sense, of what emotions and intuition physically feel like. This is a real part of you that needs to be understood to know thyself. It appears that the migration of attention to our heads and its concentration there has made us disembodied. Through the development of your attentional and interoceptive abilities, you can cultivate an awareness and feeling of the language of your body and the quality of your attention within and without your body. Interestingly, interoception and behavioral inhibition are essential to meditation, and both are mediated by the right hemisphere. Considering that the functional differences between both hemispheres is in how attention is paid, how we harness our attention matters. Where is my attention? Is it contracted or expanded? Is it focused or diffused? Light or heavy? Inwards or outwards? In my head or at the other person? Is it in the anxiety in my chest and expanded to the environment, or contracted in the thoughts of my head? Is it contracted in the activity of the moment and unaware of the greater context? Am I acting from my head or body or both? For example, a contracted attention corresponds to a contraction somewhere in your body. This contraction in the body can be made to relax through a softened attention. Interoception is feeling. It's the ability to feel or sense the internal activities and states of your body. Thinking about your feelings is not feeling. I thought it was. Just like how you can feel the texture of a table with your hand without thinking, you can feel your internal activity with your attention without thinking. Such activities and states include feelings of an ache in your shoulder, contraction in your neck, contraction in the upper stomach from breathing into your chest rather than your diaphragm, contraction between the eyebrows, contraction of the face, clenching of the jaw, pleasant lightness in the heart, hunger in the stomach, anxiety in the chest, needing to relieve your bowel or bladder, and joy and excitement in the solar plexus and heart. It seems that many of these feelings are between heavy contractions that feel like a closing in, typically associated with unpleasant emotions, and light contractions that feel like an opening up, typically associated with pleasant emotions. By guiding your attention inwards and through various ways of applying your attention, you can communicate with your body and thus develop a relationship with your body and yourself. Various ways of harnessing your attention include attuning to your solar plexus and heart to generate pleasant, calming sensations while speaking to someone or when doing an activity. Noticing that your chest breathing and switching to diaphragmatic breathing. Attending to the anxiety you're feeling in your chest and just being present with it. Noticing your face is contracted and releasing it. Attuning to your heart and asking it a question to see how it responds. Or having a dialogue with, let's say, your anger as manifested by a contraction in your neck, and noticing the bodily sensations change and dissolve. By relating to our bodies, ourselves, and differentiating and integrating our emotions and shadows, we can become a greater functional self. Some modalities for this process are Eugene Gendlin's focusing, active imagination, and IFS therapy. Many of these emotions, and especially the shadows, were not consciously adopted by us. Similar to how we did not choose much of our formative biographical aspects. Nonetheless, taking responsibility for our lives is the path towards cultivating a freer will and reducing the suffering in the world. In our relating to the felt sense of our patterns of behaviors that no longer serve us and relieving them of their service, these patterns become less reactive, giving us the space to create and respond to situations instead. Also, in doing this, we may realize that other people may simply have stowaways too. This realization reveals that everything really does flow. The energy of the sun in the food that you eat, and the emotional energies carried throughout generations and humanity. My close observations of children and their behaviors and coping mechanisms, and the tracing of these to their upbringing and environment, have made this very clear to me. And every parent was obviously a child, and so who knows how far back the emotional energy goes and what kind of stowaways have been passed down throughout humanity. We're all participating in the rolling waves that have been traveling across the oceans of humanity long, long before each of our births. Despite the weight of the past impressing upon our minds, bodies, and nervous systems, we have some degree of free will that arose from this interconnectedness, and it seems cultivatable, especially when in alignment with the whole. The choice is ours. Which aspects of humanity will we choose to perpetuate? Separation, unity, destruction, or creation? A relevant quote from the Tao Te Ching. Failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. Therefore, the master fulfills her own obligations and corrects her own mistakes. She does what she needs to do and demands nothing of others. Your body doesn't just communicate fear, guilt, shame, grief, anger, suffering, joy, happiness, excitement, and the likes. It also speaks in awe, reverence, unity, the true, the good, the beautiful, and inexplicable feelings of profound depths. These too are felt senses to discern, attune, and relate to, differentiate, and integrate. As you move your attention into your body and are able to feel more of yourself, this cultivated perception extends to all other differentiations, such as fellow humans, other life, the world, and the universe, expanding your relational field, and develops your embodied realization of your embeddedness within the whole. In feeling what we think and thinking about what we feel, a calling from the distance can begin to whisper to our souls, calling us towards our individuated and authentic self. We can respond to our calling with the complexification of our self, the increasing simultaneous differentiation and integration of all of our unique and particular experiences, propensities, shadows, perspectives, abilities, and skills through our embodiment of the self. The fractal nature of complexification leads to the complexification of the greater wholes. As we differentiate and integrate with the greater wholes that we are a part of, all nested wholes complexify. Everything flows. We are feeling creatures that think. Our purposive agency becomes aligned with the whole from which we emerge through feeling, thinking, and embodiment. As if a particle is realizing that its existence is the manifestation of the interactions of a unified field. It seems that a way for oneself to be in closest alignment with the whole is through realizing the interconnectedness of reality through the forms of concepts and formlessness of direct experience, and that there is an underlying coherence to the flux of reality, Perceiving that both the distinctions and their interrelatedness are unfolding within the flux of reality, and that this unfolding has a through line. In other words, feeling into the flow of ever-changing forms that is grounded in an organizing principle, the process of complexification. Fascinatingly, if one cultivates their perception of wholeness, they may notice winks from the whole in the form of synchronicities, an acausal connecting principle or meaningful coincidences. There are also other intriguing phenomena, such as remote viewing, seeing something non-locally, precognition, knowledge of a future event, telepathy as documented by telepathy tapes, seeing without eyes, apparently an ability that even a congenitally blind person can learn, or mind-matter interactions as I had mentioned earlier. To me, all of these phenomena, if real, are not surprising at all if we let go of our preconceived notions of reality, many of which we did not consciously adopt, and recognize that there is a fundamental underlying interconnectedness. These phenomena all point to the realm of the right hemisphere: wholeness, direct experience, feeling, and visualization. But of course, we have to be skeptical because this is in the realm of the unseen, which is ripe for people to deceive others for personal gain. Considering the possibilities of these phenomena, I really do wonder what humanity is capable of in the complexification of both left and right hemispheres. If we care about experiencing reality for what it is, we cannot take the map as primary and the terrain as secondary. The map is drawn from the terrain, not vice versa. Direct experience is primary, with caveats, and the finale. Static conceptual boundaries that are disembodied from experience are merely figments of the mind, and living in accordance with such boundaries is dysfunctional and incompatible with a phenomenal world that's continuously evolving. For example, separation is an illusion. Energy of one kind or another is always flowing. In holding the tension of both either or and both and, of form and formlessness, distinctions and interconnectedness, static concepts and the flux of reality, aiming and letting go, we have to grasp and not be attached, and let go and not be detached. Most importantly, we cannot mistake the map for the terrain, and so must ground all concepts, all partial views in the phenomenological world. Letting go of the absolute certainty of separation and distinction rooted in the left hemisphere, and abiding in the openness to uncertainty and newness rooted in the right hemisphere. Only then will we be able to see reality for what it is, a grand mystery. All I know in my mind, body, and soul is that both apparent separation and distinction and interconnectedness are real and can be felt. And there appears to be a through line to this mystery. I want to respond to this, what I call a truth, by embodying it, as limited and fallible as I may be, while being fully aware that I still have so much to experience, learn, and integrate. A return to wholeness is a return to creation. Creation is manifested through the proper relationship between both the left and right hemispheres, differentiation within integration, a purposive agency grounded within the whole. We begin as mostly an undifferentiated whole within the whole. As we emotionally, conceptually, and physically differentiate the parts within the whole, and uniquely reintegrate them with an intention drawn by an attraction colored by emotions, we are participating in the act of creation. Whether that be having good human relationships, which is the most difficult and fundamental for the complexification of humanity, raising children, upholding society, engaging with the mystery, healing trauma, stewarding the earth, making food, expressing various forms of art, telling stories, developing technology, or discovering knowledge, just look at all that we've created and imagine the possibilities. None of us consciously chose to exist, yet here we all are, embodied participants in the unfolding of this grand mystery. We are the process of complexification, or the process of creation manifested. We collectively have the potential for the creation of what is true, good, and beautiful. Can you feel it? That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope I have conveyed a taste of the mystery that felt sense in your body as excitement, unease, curiosity, or intrigue. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope to see you at the next video. Take care.